Hey guys, BeSnappy here. I'm here with Bob Small, one of the most experienced pilots I've ever met. He's captained the A380, 747, A330, and the mighty 767. Bob is going to show us through a legendary aircraft where it all started for him, the Douglas DC-3. How are you, Bob?
Wonderful.
All right, let's get started with some of the features of this aeroplane.
Yep.
What did you love about it the most?
Okay, this particular aeroplane is very special. It was built in, I believe, 1942 in Santa Monica. And it was this particular aeroplane that started out the first flight for TAA in 1946, Melbourne to Sydney.
Yeah.
So it's a very historic aeroplane. Come on, I'll show you the engines and see how that's set up.
This aircraft was in service for a long time. The engines must be very reliable.
If you read that, it says Pratt & Whitney, dependable engine. And they are. 14-cylinder, 1830 cubic inch, supercharged, 1,200 horsepower. People who've been in the armed forces generally only have to hear one of these going over the top and they'll know it. They'll recognise it. This aeroplane has got 4 tanks in the inboard wings, 2 each side, carrying a total of 800 US gallons. And it burns in the area of 100 gallons an hour. You've got about 1,200 miles range.
Is it usual that a passenger plane would be a tail dragger?
Well, back in 1935 it was very usual. With this aeroplane the tail doesn't steer, but by a combination of changing power and a little bit of brake as well, the aeroplane is very manoeuvrable on the ground. In fact, it'll get around more quickly than a nose wheel aeroplane.
As you see, this aircraft right now is exactly how it was designed in 1946. Trans-Australia Airlines, or TAA as most people know it.
Okay, I think we'd better have a look inside.
All right, let's go.
Come on up.
I'm stepping back into history.
He'll love it. Even the inside, this is the way it was in 1946.
And look, it's the original TAA seat covers.
There was only one class. They didn't have first and economy and business and all that stuff, but the legroom is really good.
So when was this exact plane last in service?
Okay, having flown TAA's first service,
Yeah.
it then flew for many years with TAA, but around about the early 70s, they started Tullamarine Airport down in Melbourne. And they decided in their wisdom that what they wanted was an aeroplane to be up on a pole in the middle of the car park. So they found a DC-3, they found this DC-3, and it stayed on the pole for 6 or 8 years. And then the trees grew up around it and people could hardly see the DC-3.
Yeah.
And a bunch of people from TAA said, I think we should get the DC-3 down off the pole. So they did. And they started to look through it and they said, you know, I think we can get this flying again.
Wow.
And they did. Now, it's a warmish day today, but I've opened the windows before we arrived. That is the only form of air conditioning. You could heat it okay.
Oh yeah.
There's heaters built into the engines, but there is no cooling.
Still got the air vents and lights and the TAA curtains.
Yeah.
The toilet and the kitchen at the back.
We better have a look at the cockpit then.
Oh yeah, sure.
Modern-ish.
So what's all this equipment here?
All of the navigation systems that it had in 1946. I mean, you know, these days radio sets are small. They weren't then.
Bob, the first thing I noticed was the steering system here actually looks like a steering wheel in a car if you chop the top off.
It does a little bit. This came well before the days of powered controls.
Yeah.
And it meant that for you to have an effect on the controls, you had to put in enough force. So it's not a heavy aeroplane to fly, but it's not light.
It looks all very manual. I can't see a digital screen inside.
This aeroplane predates just about any automatic system you've ever heard of. So it's got an autopilot.
Huh.
We don't use it particularly often, but it's available if we need it. 2 fairly powerful engines. You need to be able to control the propeller pitch, which makes the RPM what you need it to be. Throttles, and these are mixture controls, which tell the carburetor how you want them to work and affects the fuel flow.
How much airspeed do you actually need to take off? Because even while we're sitting here, it's quite high with the angle of attack.
It is a high angle of attack. In fact, if you put the power on takeoff and left it sitting here, it would take off long before we wanted to. When you take off, you have to have enough airspeed that if an engine fails, you've got enough control power to keep it straight. So what we do, in fact, as we run down the runway at about 40 knots, we push the nose down so that the whole fuselage is level, like a normal aeroplane.
Yeah.
And then when we get to about 80 knots, we can pull back and it flies normally. And we've got control all the way. That's the elevator trim.
Yeah.
Down here we've got aileron and rudder trims. We've got fuel selectors. You can run either engine off any of the 4 tanks.
There's the airspeed indicator. What is the cruise speed?
Well, it wasn't a fast cruising aeroplane. Cruise speed is around about there, 140, 145 knots. And there is a very good hydraulic system. Pulling the gear up and down, the landing gear, is a little bit more difficult in this aeroplane. There's a lever here,
Yeah.
which positively locks the gear down when it's on the ground or on approach. This lever is what we need to pull the landing gear up. And because it doesn't have fuel boost pumps, the first officer who's ever in this seat gets to have to work this one to build up the fuel pressure to start the engines. Once the engines are running, the engine has a fuel pump of its own. I've been flying DC-3s for a long time and I've never had any hydraulic problems at all.
Old style quality.
That's it. Built to last.
Thanks, Bob. That was an amazing tour and pleasure to meet you.
And you too.